Hello, I'm Dr. Angela Byrd-Wright, the Division Equity Leader for Hampton City Schools, and I'm certainly glad that you're joining me today. You might have missed the CIA team presentation, and so we'll be reviewing today in Learning Session 4A, where we're still in phase 1, and we're talking about operationalizing equity. So in this session, we will begin to lay the groundwork in regards to examining fragility, racial equity, and anti-racism, and the collective impact on student achievement and organizational progress. This session is broken into 2 parts, and so this recording will just be for session 4A, and then we will pick up our conversation as we conclude on these thoughts in regards to 4B at a later time. Glad that you're with me today. So as we can recall, onboarding and pre-competence, this is our longest phase of our process where we are really unpacking that common language and understanding through critical consciousness, understanding our self-reflection, our true awareness of our own racial, ethnic, and cultural background, and understanding how each affects our perceptions, our values, beliefs, and our practices. This phase, again, as a reminder, is designed to build and to bridge an understanding of how our key definitions of equity, inequity, race, identity, and the like are foundational to developing cultural competence. So I'd like you now to reflect and connect for just a few moments. So after I go through the prompts, it'll be a good time for you to pause your video just to think for a moment, where we're connecting our last learning session 3. And if you recall, we were talking about critical consciousness and its impact on student performance, as well as the way that we interact and work with one another. And so now I'd like you to think about those thoughts from learning session 3, and we're going to carry that forward into learning session 4A as follows. So recall from your reflection from learning session 2, where you were asked to respond to the prompt, what is a child's right to learn in our school division and schools? So now, given your training on critical consciousness from learning session 3, how might your initial response have differed or either affirm what you have learned? And then think for a moment, you may want to just jot this down in your notes about what resonated with you and a purposeful application of what you learned after viewing one of the videos from the self-paced exercises that you were given during learning session 3. This will be a great time to pause the video now so that you can reflect and connect. Welcome back. I hope that you've had the opportunity to really think on what resonated with you as you engaged in your self-paced work from the last session, and then thinking through what a child's right is to learn in our school division and our school. So now think on this thing. What then is the moral imperative for equity work? I want to give you a moment to think back from your reflections, from the first 2 prompts there, from your previous work that we've done together as a team, and think about what now is the moral imperative for equity work. This will be a great time to pause the video, and we'll come back together in just a moment. Welcome back. I hope that you've had the opportunity to deeply reflect and connect to the prompts that have been provided, the self-paced exercises as well, because as we prepare for this learning session, I want you to consider the questions that were asked in your self-paced work, because it allows you to have an initial baseline for readiness for a deeper discussion and a deeper dive into our equity work. So what are our participant actions for this session? We're going to unpack fragility, racial equity, and anti-racism in education. We will examine the collective impact on student achievement and our organizational progress as a whole. Now, as a reminder, this particular session may have some sensitive content, and it might even present a challenge. Our earlier norms of creating our spaces that are safe, that are brave for authenticity, will be applied from our previous learning sessions so that we can engage in authentic and honest conversations and thinking that will be required throughout this session and part 2 of this session as well moving forward. So what is our driver? You know, every time that we're together, we talk about not only our participant action and description there, but what's the drive behind the work that we're doing? And so the key terms of fragility, power, privilege, racial equity, and anti-racism are necessary and as a part of our necessary conversation and foundational to the work of equity. And if these areas are not unpacked, challenged, and or examined, then our work toward equity will be significantly hindered and ineffectual, which can really block our way or impede our way toward developing those cultural proficient spaces, being culturally competent, and engaging in cultural responsiveness as well. So I want you just to take a look to the right when we think about our equity model here for our school division, that at the core of our work is teaching and learning, surrounded by culturally responsive teaching, leadership, and a responsive curriculum within a safe and nurturing environment that maximizes every child's learning. And when we say every child, we mean every child, every day, whatever it takes. And thusly, it does require us to dig deeper into our work so that we can push forward as to the ways that we can advance student achievement and organizational progress here in our school division. Take a moment now to click on your reflection guide. We always come with a reflection guide so that you can really dig into your work and also have another area where you can go back to reflect on. So I'm going to go back to our reflection guide here. It looks very similar to what you have seen in the past. You're going to see space for each area that we will unpack today during this portion of our conversation. So as always, it's important for us to commit to brave spaces so that we can understand and learn from one another, making sure that we're intentional as a group of learners that grows through interaction, having a constructive space to share, to disagree, not be disagreeable, but might be able to disagree, but yet work together, and a comfortable place to be uncomfortable. And that requires us to listen actively, to affirm others, to share our talking time, to be honest and thoughtful and authentic, but most of all, as you've heard me say on multiple occasions, to stay engaged and to speak your truth. Very important in this work. Remember, what you learn here leaves here, but what you say will stay here. So full transparency warning, our learning for these next few sessions will not be easy. There are going to be some topics that may be challenging, that are going to cause you to shift and examine yourself, your focus, your practices, and also reflect closely on your interactions with and beliefs of and about others. So in some cases today or moving forward, you may have to face down some internal fears and anxieties, and you might leave with more questions answered, while others will have some questions that will force you to think about your own personal next steps. But as always, stay engaged. So are you ready? And I hope your answer was yes. And so what I'd like you to do now is to click on your screen where you see the student.desmos.com activity. If you select the graphic, it's going to take you directly there. Or if you're just following along with me by the video, then you go to student.desmos.com and you're going to type in the code W2428J. It is not case sensitive, so you should be able to get right there. Once you've done so, you will be here on our landing page. I've anonymized our participants. but I want you to take in some key considerations. And so there'll be some questions that you'll be asked. So consider the following statements and select the one that best describes how you feel. There'll be 3 prompts here. I'm usually uncomfortable talking about race or racism. I'm sometimes uncomfortable talking about race or racism. I'm usually comfortable, though, talking about it. I'm very comfortable talking about race or racism. So you're going to take a few minutes to answer that prompt. And then you'll use the sentence stem activity to self-reflect. So you may want to think about the hardest part of talking about race or racism is, and then the beneficial part of talking about race or racism is. And then 3, after reflecting on your own comfort level, think about how you will stay engaged when topics of race arise, and where can you commit? This will be a great time to pause the video and to engage in the activity. I'll see you in just a moment. Well, welcome back. I hope that you've had the opportunity to have some authentic reflection for yourself as we begin to delve into this next space of work. So now let's reflect and connect more. In your reflection guide, you're going to see the set. So first I asked you if you were ready, and now we're going to set. So I'd like you to use the graphic organizer that's in your reflection guide to list no more than 3 vulnerabilities that you worry could limit your effectiveness. Next, you will identify 2 strengths that you believe will help you lead open and honest dialogues. And then lastly, at least 1 need that, if met, would improve your ability to engage in difficult or courageous conversations. So using the graphic organizer in your reflection guide, list no more than 3 vulnerabilities that you worry could limit your effectiveness, 2 strengths that would really advance conversations, and then number 1, just 1 need that, if met, would improve your ability to engage in difficult or courageous conversations. This will be a good time to pause the video now so that you can check in. Welcome back. I hope that you've had the opportunity now to dig in and think about your vulnerabilities, strengths, and needs. And at this juncture, as we've been going through that commitment to brave and safe spaces, this is really paramount here because we're making some, in some cases, some baby steps, some gallops, some leaps here when we're being honest with what can set us apart in being vulnerable and engaging in some deep conversations, moving past that shallow or surface level to really meaningful and impactful conversations that can really set the trajectory as to where we'll land in our authenticity as we dig deeper on matters of equity. What are those strengths that you can bring to the table that can help you lead those open and honest conversations? And then also making sure that your needs are met when engaging in these types of conversations. So here's a tool. So now we've readied ourselves, we're setting ourselves up, and now it's time to go. And so I'm going to share with you just a protocol or a tool that will help you to think about ways when you have to engage in challenging or difficult conversations and how we can be equipped with the strategy that we can use to persevere. And that's called the reiterate, contemplate, respire, and communicate. So when we're in the reiterate stage, we restate what we heard. This step really helps you to reflect on what you have heard as opposed to what you may think you heard. And repeating what you heard limits miscommunication and misinformation. Contemplating. Sometimes it's important to count to 10 before responding. You might be thinking to yourself, I might need to count to 10, not just 10, 15, 20, and that's fine too. But contemplating is important before responding because it takes you the time to think and limits an immediate emotional response that can possibly veer off track or send the conversation into a confrontation. So very important to remember. Next, respire. Taking a deep breath, breathe, and then check in with yourself. Take a few breaths before responding can really settle your thoughts and emotions during difficult or challenging conversations. And then lastly, communicate. Speak with compassion and thoughtfulness. Speak as you want to be spoken to, assuming good intentions and seeking understanding. And when we disagree, again, going back to those commitments, when we disagree with something someone has said, focus on challenging the statement rather than the person who said it. Very important to note. So you can see the lightning on this somehow calm sea here because we're getting ready to engage in some courageous conversations. And what are courageous conversations? Courageous conversations allow us to break through barriers. It engages those who won't talk. It sustains the conversation when it can get uncomfortable or diverted. And it can deepen the conversation to the point where authentic understanding and meaningful actions occur. So before we talk about the courageous conversation compass, I'd like you to hear from Singleton and his thoughts about courageous conversations and achieving equity in schools. So let's hear from Dr. Singleton.
I'm definitely not the first to talk about a compass and to talk about a compass from the place of understanding that we need direction. We need to understand where we are and where we're going. And very personally speaking, the compass has just arrived in my mind as this understanding that I typically approach race from an emotional space. And I lived in that quadrant of feeling. And I noticed that for lots of people who didn't approach race from an emotional space, it was often hard for them to hear me. And so initially I believed that, well, it's just a feeling for me. And for me to be authentic, I got to stay with my feeling. But then I thought a little longer, a bit deeper on this. And I recognized that I'm more than a feeling. I'm also some thinking. I have some beliefs. And I have this drive to take action, to act on this situation. And so how would I get myself out of the feeling quadrant and into another quadrant? And I looked across this idea of what feels opposite to me, to my emotion, my intellect. And that's how the compass is not only designed, but that's how it was created. I needed to move. I needed to grab onto other dimensions of me as I was exploring these ideas connected to race. And I'm not saying that the emotional statements are not valuable, important, powerful, but I'm saying that the emotional statements are more valuable and more powerful when they're coupled with intellectual inquiry. And so for me, the compass is centering myself on what's natural and normal for me, the emotion connected to race, with what I've also had to develop in me, my intellect and my ideas, and even my concerns and my questions about race. And when I put those together, I'm having a conversation in the acting quadrant that's way different. But even more, I now have a new belief about race. I have a belief that if I balance these things, the persons who are engaging with me have more of an opportunity to actually hear what I'm saying. And as you find yourself acquainted with your first quadrant, then look across the compass to what awaits you and what development is possible for you. And use the rest of the book to approach that new part of the compass. And in doing so, you will do that thing that I'm describing called getting centered.
So now that you've heard from Dr. Singleton, he talked about getting centered. In doing so, that helps us when we need to engage in courageous conversations. Knowing where you are on the compass, as well as those with whom you are speaking, is very important, because it's nothing worse than speaking and not being seen, not being heard. And so knowing where to tap in on the compass will help to deepen conversations, strengthen conversations, but also advance where you're trying to head in said conversation. So you might want to center yourself and think through, well, where do I fall on this compass? Am I more emotional? As you heard Dr. Singleton speak initially for himself. So think about emotionally. We can respond to information through feelings when a racial issue strikes us at a physical level, and it can cause an internal sensation such as anger, sadness, joy, or embarrassment. Or morally, we can respond to deep-seated beliefs that relate to racial information or an event. This belief has to do with right versus wrong. Or do we operate from a place of the intellectual, where our primary response to an issue or information may be characterized by personal disconnect with the subject, or our response is based on our best thinking, data-driven? Or relationally, we can connect and respond to information through our acting or specific behaviors. And this is a learned skill. When we were in the live session, we had one of our CIA team members state, knowing who I am and then operating from a place where I can relate to others is a true skill. Are there some tools that I can use that will really help me to deepen conversations with those I work with on a regular basis, the teachers or folks that I coach, administrators that I work with and support? And my answer was yes, absolutely. And so what we're going to do is engage in a dialogue support sheet. You'll see that on the presentation if you select the red link here. But the dialogue support sheet allows you some sentence starters to help deepen your understanding and conversations that you may have with others. So first, you got to center yourself. You heard that from Dr. Singleton. And now from me, center yourself and know where you are on the compass. Next, identify the quadrant of the compass that an individual may fall, which will help you determine the appropriate way to facilitate and navigate courageous or difficult conversations. Because if not, things can blow up. Each quadrant has a set of questions or sentence starters. They'll help to deepen your understanding and the conversation rather than blowing it up. And so it'll be important when we move into section B of our time together for this learning session that you bring back your dialogue support sheet. So if you select that link, it will take you here. And you'll have the opportunity to see each of those quadrants. So just to reiterate, moral, acknowledgement of beliefs; intellectual, more information or data; emotionality or emotional and acknowledgement of feelings and empathy, and then social or relational, and what that person may need or what you may need. So take a moment just to reflect and connect with yourself. Where do you fall on the compass? And then think about when people are engaged in conversations with you, how you have responded and how you go about interacting with others and those that you work with, and maybe try to think about where they might fall on the compass. But you want to speak from a place of authenticity for yourself. And now having a tool to say, if you know someone operates more from the moral sense, then you might, when you're engaging in conversations, say, well, I understand what you're saying, or I understand why you might feel that way. And I also see how it could be viewed differently, and then explain your position. If you know that you may operate from an intellectual place, then when someone is speaking to you, you might want to hear someone say, well, here's some more information or research or data about blank. Or you can find more resources on this topic, because then you'll be able to respond in such a way that not only are you heard, but you also know that the person or persons engaged with you are hearing one another, because that moves the conversation forward into an authentic place. We're also going to pause now and think about the courageous conversation compass and unpack it a bit. So we're going to watch this very brief video. right. So you had the opportunity to see about the Courageous Conversations Compass and the dialogue support sheet. One of the important things that was in that particular video talked about, it's nothing's going to change overnight, but a commitment to change will allow us day after day to continue to change and to grow and to make an impact with those that we are frequently around and that we support. So just a reminder from phase 1, learning session 2, where we talked about those key terms of race, ethnicity, diversity, and culture, and understanding the difference between the four. Race being a social construct based on physical appearance, ethnicity, the identity-based ancestry, language, or culture, diversity, the recognition of differences, and culture, having an understanding of the social environments or the things that make social environments meaningful through language, customs, beliefs, rules, arts, and knowledge, or what makes us and shapes us, what makes us who we are. So why is that important? I'd like you to take a moment just to try to get, so here we are bringing back some more illusions, if you recall from learning session three, how much fun we had with that during critical consciousness. But I want you to take a moment just to think about what you believe this is. Well, how about now? And what about now? So you may recognize this particular sculpture here. It's the bean here. It's known there in Chicago. And each of those pictures were different aspects of the bean. And distinguishing between terms of race, ethnicity, diversity, and culture helps us to understand the labels that we can oftentimes place on others and what others can place on us. Race denotes social meaning affixed to skin color, whereas ethnicity defines cultural markers. And the working definition of race, however, recognizes that these three identifiers do not operate with equal force and familiarity in U.S. society. So now I'd like you to reflect and connect on the following. So racially speaking, the me I see is, the me you see is, and the me I think you see is. I want you to take for a moment, so in your reflection guide, you have a graphic organizer that goes along with these three prompts. So I want you to take just a few minutes. This will be a great time to pause the video before we begin to conclude this portion of our time together. So welcome back. I hope that you've had the opportunity to reflect and connect on these three prompts. Here's a quick question for you to think about. Were all three responses the same? And if not, look at your form there, or you might be sitting with a thinking partner. If not, how are they different? Or how do some of those closest to you or colleagues answer those questions? Did you experience or struggle or have conflict as you completed the sentences? And last question, what do you believe to be the reason for this dissonance? And so taking the time to reflect here is going to set us up for our next section of our time together as we dig into, or really now begin to unpack, fragility, power, privilege, racial equity, as well as digging deeper into other marginalized or discriminated groups. How we respond is going to be important. Knowing where we are and centering ourselves will prepare us for the courageous conversations that we will have as we move into that section. I'd like to leave you with this particular quote, and that is this: the social structures that are in place or that exist in society are frequently based on race. And schools do not merely inherit or manage racial and ethnic identities, they create and enforce racial meanings. Schools structure the conditions for the embodiment, performance, and or interruption of sustained and inequitable racial formations. So as long as students and staff are insulated from the realities of racism, they will have little reason to change their behaviors or attitudes. Powerful thought from Ed Equity VA, Anti-Racism in Education. And I'll leave you with that thought as we get ready to transition into our conclusion for this portion of this session. We will pick up with learning session 4B at our next time together. So prior to our next section, it'll be important to complete the self-paced work individually. So make sure that you complete the meeting sign-in and the equity post-work exercise. As a reminder, if you've not already, go ahead and complete learning session 3 of the self-paced work. That is linked in the presentation as well. You can find it by selecting the red link here. So again, making sure you complete your meeting sign-in and your equity post-work exercise. And just in case you haven't finished the previous learning session, make sure that you've done that self-paced work as well. As always, I thank you for your time, your energy, and commitment as we move forward in advancing the work of equity here in Hampton City Schools. Bye-bye now.